Hi, thank you all for being here at the Simsbury Free Library. This man probably doesn't need much introduction. He is so well known around. He is Dr. Nick Bellantoni, and he's talking about his new book, and he's talking about archaeology, hiking the ruins of southern New England, which is his new book, and it's available here, available all over if you want to buy it. Is it available on here?
You can get it online. You can get it at Barnes & Noble. You can get it at my house. We got a bunch of them.
Just stop by. For those of you who don't know, he was Connecticut State Archaeologist Emeritus at the Connecticut State Museum of Natural History, and is an Associate Research Professor at the Department of Anthropology at the University of Connecticut. He received his PhD in anthropology from the University of Connecticut in 1987 and was shortly thereafter appointed the second Connecticut State Archaeologist. He's former President of the Archaeology Society of Connecticut and the National Association of the State Archaeologists. Nick?
And a speaker at the Simsbury Free Library. So obviously we're having audio-visual problems. I had a PowerPoint presentation. I'm not sure they could work it out, but that's okay. I mean, we'll just give you a little bit about it and some of the trails in the area as much as we could do without, the actual visuals here. But the book is actually by Falcon Guides. It's hiking ruins in southern New England. Basically, it's Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island. We selected 40 trails. We didn't put the McLean in there, but from Simsbury, but it was in one of the lists. My editor was basically, Nick, you got too much in Connecticut in here, and had to get some other states in. But we have obviously the Farmington Canal in Avon, Farmington area. We'll talk about that in a moment. They did a really nice job with the book. It's a lot of color images, sturdy paper that you could take the book out into the field with you when you're hiking, so it won't fall apart. The production is great. The writing stinks, but the production is really good in terms of the book. So what happened here was that a colleague of mine, Barbara Kipford, came to me with an editor from Falcon Guides and said, Nick, they're thinking of doing a book that people can take trails throughout southern New England and see archaeological ruins, see, old mill ruins, cemeteries, old house foundations, and unique things like the Farmington Canal, or in Unionville, there's a trail called Suburban Park that takes you through an old amusement park from the early 20th century that are all ruins today. So there's some really unique stuff in here. And at first, I thought, I wasn't quite sure about putting something like this together, because as a state archaeologist, I spent much my time preserving archaeological sites and protecting them. And sometimes protecting archaeological sites means not telling people where they are exactly. So here's a book I'm going to do that's going to put, where some of these historic sites are. But what we decided to do is, in our concerns of that, is we have a section on etiquette in archaeological sites, what not to do, don't step on stones, do different things. And we also have archaeology and the law in there, so that you know who to contact, what the laws might be in each of the states, and so forth. But most hikers, hikers are good people, really. They want to be out there and enjoy it. And I've had so many of them come to me over the years and say, I was on the Tunxus Trail and I saw this, and what was that? What was that all about, those ruins I saw? And so, when I thought about that, I said, okay, we'll do the book, but we'll only do trails that are on established, known sites, that are on established, known trails, so people could, could learn about them, learn the history behind them, understand what they're looking at, and hopefully, give them more of their hiking experience. I think people, when they go hiking, they want to see the natural environment, the trees, the landscapes, and we all want that. And it's a beautiful part of the wooded areas of Connecticut. But you kind of have to remember that everywhere you go in Connecticut, even if you think you're in the highest woods, has a human fingerprint on it. A human fingerprint from Native Americans who were here for 12,000 years and living on the landscape. But also, we have really developed and roads and what have you. Our signature, our human signature is all over the state and all over southern New England. So when you go and see that quote unquote natural environment, you also have to be aware of the human landscape that shapes it. Okay, so that's what we really try to do through this. I would tell you that the best time, if you want to go on any of these hikes, is probably to do it like November to April. Now that's not the nicest time of the year, but ground vegetation is down then, and as a result, you're going to be able to see things. So some of these are higher. But much of it, some of these rooms are absolutely covered by ground vegetation. There are a couple of, for example, old colonial homesteads where the cellar hole and so forth, surrounded by vegetation that really, you might walk near and by without even noting it. They may be just off the trail and the vegetation's so high you don't see it. So we guide you to that, but also note that, it's best to see everything, if you really want to see it all, is when the vegetation is down. The other thing is that these aren't long walks. This is not the Appalachian Trail you have to take. These walks are basically, sometimes to get into where the ruins are, it's maybe a mile, sometimes even less. But the trails that you're going to be on are long trails, and you should take advantage of that and try to get, when you're out there, to go beyond what we do. The book just gets you to the ruins and back, but there are more to these trails that are significant, and you should. And of course, they all, have great scenic views. They all have, usually, not all of them, but many of them have picnic areas. Bring the kids, and it's good family stuff to be out there. And you can take advantage of all that. So that's what we try to do, is kind of get you set up with that. And it's a typical, trail book where it's got all the data you need, the distance, the hiking time, the difficulty, the trail service, whether your dog's allowed or not. The whole thing is there. Who to contact if you need to contact those that maintain the trail. So we try to give you all that basic data, the time and so forth, the distance. But the most fun is the history, because there are some great stories behind these trails and some of the ruins you'll see out there. And that, for me, was the most enjoyable part of the experience, to get there and to see them, but also understand the history. So that was to me. So with that, let me just give you a couple of the trails. I'll give you some in the area, some of them. And again, I'll just have to do it verbally, and it'll be no problem, because I think I remember the book. I'm not quite sure. So the closest trail you got, of course, is in Farmington. It's listed in the book, and that's the Farmington Canal Heritage Trail and so forth. This is a real unique trail. We start you off of Old Farms Road, with the new bridges that they put in with Route 10. You take a connector from there, and it's a loop trail. And what it does is we start you down the Connecticut River, and the Farmington River, and you walk along that for a bit of a way, actually crossing from Avon into Farmington. You'll see the town markers separating the town line, and then you get to the first ruin, which is the abutment of the Farmington Canal that went over, the Farmington Aqueduct rather, and the canal that went over the river. And if you really want to see what that is, you got a special thing here, because Carl Walters over here did a wonderful model of that abutment, the bridge itself. It's just a tremendous thing. And you can actually visualize it. When you get out there, of course, you're not going to see that whole model. It's a ruin today. But the abutments on both sides are visible. On the other side, you could see it with I think it's the Henry Morgan Trail. I think it's on the other side there. Might have but on the east side of the bank, you could look across from where you are in Farmington on the west side and actually get to see the abutment there. And the abutment will stand in front of you, probably as high as this ceiling, maybe even higher. And it looks like something out of Machu Picchu is what it really is. It's a wonderfully stone-laid. to connect, so the canal goes, I think it's like 36 feet over the Farmington River and goes. The Farmington Canal, it was about 80 miles long. The importance, it was the early canals in the 1820s and were extremely important because of the fact that, travel over land was so difficult. Wagons, bumpy roads, rutted, ice, snow. So travel and commerce basically had to go through rivers or coastlines. It's the only way they could really move effectively. It took a long time to go up and down, especially if you're going to Connecticut, going across Connecticut, it's like a corrugated box, right? So when the technology of building canals came in, the Erie Canal in New York was very effective. Hartford, in that need, Hartford and New Haven were competing as to who was going to be the capital, right? And you probably know that story. It went back and forth for a few years. New Haven would serve as the capital, then Hartford would serve as the capital. Hartford had the advantage because they had the Connecticut River. But there was nothing from New Haven that could get you to the interior. So when the canal technology came in, they conceived of what was called the Farmington Canal, because in Farmington is where it was actually, the businessmen got together and incorporated. It was an 80-mile trail. It went from New Haven, Connecticut, to the interior of Connecticut through this area, up into Massachusetts, where it connected with another canal, and eventually to Northampton on the Connecticut River. So it was a way to get, but it was allowed commerce to go interior, and it really helped New Haven. And it was very successful while it was going, but they ran into issues. Some of the issues had to do with vandalism, some had to do with droughts, weather conditions. Storms would wreck the canal, had to be prepared. And so there was a lot of upkeep, and eventually when railroad technology came in, the railroads basically used the canal bed for the most part through the area. So what's unique about the Avon Trail is that it is the only trail, and there are trails that do the Farmington Canal. There's one that goes, the paved one that goes all the way down to New Haven through Cheshire, up to Cheshire. You can get on there where they have an actual lock that's still in place. That is really cool if you've never seen it. But what's unique about the Avon one, this is the only one where you actually get into the canal. You actually cross into the canal, where the others, basically the path, the trails are using the towpath, where the animals put. And you could see, again, the model, to go take a look at it. So this one actually allows you to get in there, and that really is very, very important and very unique. It makes it an extremely unique trail. It was one of my favorites. When the guys at Avon all showed it to me, I realized this has got to be in the book, because it's got such great history, but also a uniqueness of what you get to see. And there are portions of it where the canal is very visible. I think the ditch, if you will, went down about 16 feet or so, and you could really, get the feel of the boats, literally those barges going right over you. It's really, really quite unique. In Unionville, not too terribly far away, in Farmington also, you've got, I mentioned Suburban Park, and that's kind of neat. It's a little hit, it's right at Unionville Center, right on Route 4. You could easily drive by it and never know it's there. But it's a wonderful park, and it really was basically the end of the trolley from Hartford. So the Hartford Trolley Company, they had developed the trolley system that went all the way out into the suburbs to Unionville. That was the terminus, okay? So, they wanted to get people out there, use the trolley, make some money, and get them, especially like on weekends, to when they weren't as busy with business people using the trolley to get into downtown Hartford. So what they did basically is they built a little amusement park. Now we're talking 1890s, okay? When they started first using the trolley. The trolley was used, by the way, until the 1930s, before it finally totally went under, and I guess buses came along at that point. But the trolley was pretty. So you would take, what they did is they coaxed people to take the trolley in Hartford, come on out to what they called the suburbs back then, and I guess they're still the suburbs, and to the terminus, enjoy a day at the amusement park, and then jump on the trolley and head home. So there were, at the amusement park, you had rides, it had ponds for bunting ponds for boating. They had, and you could see the ruins of it, it's a circular fountain. It's about, it could just about fit into this room, the width of this room. And it's one of the first electrified water fountains in the country. And the ruins are still there. There are other ruins of a dance hall and pavilion that was big for dancing. People used to come up and have dinner and dance. That is all gone. And but the ruins, the foundations are still there. There's even the ruins of an ice cream parlor, which I love. It's not very much to look at. It's just a series of stone, look like a little stone wall, but basically it's a foundation and embedding that goes around. And it was, a part of an ice cream bar. I tried to do some digging to see if I could find cones, but it didn't work out very well. But so there's this whole setting, and there's more to it. The other thing that's neat about Suburban Park is, if you're coming down Route 4 and you're coming northbound, and you get to Unionville Center, if you know it, the cemetery's up on the hill on your right. Okay, that cemetery, and behind it, now much of that was formed through glacial activity, and what you've got in the back there is what we call glacial kettles. You've got these deep, when I say deep, 30, 40 feet deep pits into the ground. It's all very sandy soil out there. And basically what it was, glaciers, as the glacier was advancing and receding, when it was receding, chunks of ice would calf off and hit the ground and then start seeping down and creating these cone shapes. And so it is right next to, so one of the pavilion, for example, where the dancing pavilion is, you can go right around that area and look down and you'll see a magnificent view of an old glacial kettle dating to anywhere, usually probably 18, 20,000 years ago. Connecticut was free of ice by 15,000 years ago, so that whole activity predates that. And so it's really cool. Where are you going to see an amusement park like that? In Barkhamsted, not too far away from here, we got a number of sites, trails up there. But I'm only going to tell you one because of that. And this one is Mark Banks, who's in the back here, showed me, him and Paul Hart from Barkhamsted. This is basically the ruins of what we think is a cheese box factory. Have you ever heard of a cheese box factory? Okay, in the early 19th century, the weather conditions here were fairly wet. And as a result, there was, with the temperatures and so forth, a lot of grass. Grass and fields were coming up really good. And so what ended up happening is dairy farmers were doing really good because their cattle were really beefing up. And so as a result of more dairy products, there was more cheese they could crank out. And what they would do is marketing this cheese, some of it to go to the Erie Canal and go out west, as well as being. So what the cheese box was usually, and you might see these in antique shops, was a kind of be about that high, round. It would be rounded, and it would have, wood splint around it in the shape. Hold the cheese, prepare it, and send it off for manufacturing. So when Mark and Paul showed me this site, it's called the Henry Buck Trail. I forgot to mention that. It's on West Road. It's right on in American Legion Forest. Okay. When you take the trail in, it's pretty easy. It's fairly flat, and what it does is it goes right by. As you're on a kind of higher level, you look down and you see a part of what was once the CCC Camp White. So the CCC, during the American Depression, Roosevelt's administration, Civil Conservation Corps, to put young men to work during the Depression, helping to create parks and so forth. So they have a camp there, and you can actually still see remnants of that camp as you walk through. But then you get further in, and now, you know, those of you that are familiar with water-powered industry and mills, you know, like down here, you know, you need water, and you need flowing water, and most of them are either on slopes or down below. And Mark said, you know, well, it's up that, see that hill? It's up there. And I'm saying to myself, what is a mill doing up on the top of it? So this is where it gets a little rugged, because you have to switch back, and it's pretty steep. And in fact, on the, well, I don't have it here, but the CCC actually built stone stairs to help navigate people, hikers up the hill. But when you finally get up there, you see the ruins, which are really fabulous. The stone ruins of the mill itself. If you go behind the mill, the trail takes you across a dam, which would have been the stone and earthen dam, and behind it, the remnants of a pond that would have been there too. The water was flown over from the dam down, probably through wooden sluices, because we couldn't find anything that suggested otherwise, and funneled into a circular, if you will, pit, which probably had a turbine or something like that, and that powered the cables, if you will, the gears rather, and that through belts would have had upstairs from it that would have had the actual manufacturing of the cheese boxes. And it's so unique because this is the most unlikely place to find anything like this. And it appears to date, when you look at it, to the early 19th or mid-19th century. Fabulous, well worth the hike up there. If you ever get to go to Mystic, Connecticut, this is a neat one. It's called Coogan's Heritage Farm Trail, okay? You go down, you've been to Mystic, right? Everybody in the state's been to Mystic. You get off the highway, you go down Route 27, going toward the seaport and the village beyond that. Well, you've passed it. If you've been there, you've passed this probably many, many times. But as you're coming down, before you reach the seaport, on the left, you'll see a white farmhouse. And if you look closely enough, a sign that says Coogan Farm, Heritage Farm and Trail, okay? Pull right in there. The farm really begins back in the 1600s, okay? After the Pequot War, and the Pequots were defeated, this was all Pequot homeland. Mystic, all of that, that was all Pequot land. The Connecticut government, the militia, the colonial government, divided that land up. So Captain Gallup was given 500, 600 acres for serving in the war that put down the Pequots, and he was given the land that they confiscated from the tribe. As soon as they started farming, they started finding stone arrow points and, you know, projectile points and spear points and pottery. There was a significant camp village in that area. And it was farmed from the 1600s right into the 20th century. In fact, the Coogans are the last farmers in the 20th century, and thus get the name of it. But the trail is neat for two reasons. Number one is you get to go right behind the old Coogan house to their dairy barn. The barn's gone, it's nothing but a ruin. But the trail, and I'm gonna just show you, the cover of the book shows the stone steps going down from the trail. In fact, the trail goes, you take the stone steps to get down into the dairy barn. And what's cool about this is it's one of the largest, if not the largest, 19th century barn I have ever seen in Connecticut or New England. This thing was huge. Had two levels, you know, the ground level may have been where you brought the animals in, the upper level where you brought the hay and maybe your wagons and so forth. You know, they were constructed, you know, usually with slopes and so forth. But the stonework is amazing, and while the hot barn is gone, the ruins are still there. But the most interesting thing is when you take the trail up to the top of the hill, and there you're going to see the ruins of a Gilded Age mansion. Okay, you guys have been to Newport, right? And you've seen the mansions there. This is a mansion where you actually get to see the foundation and the cellar. What happened is a woman by the name of Elizabeth Greenman. She married a guy by the name of Thomas Stillman. Stillman was a lawyer in New York City. They were fairly wealthy at the end of the 19th century, the Gilded Age, as Mark Twain would call it. And they decided they'd buy the parcel, they'd buy the farm with the purpose of building their mansion up on the top of the hill. The mansion would have given them a view of the Mystic River below, the hills of Groton in the background, the seaport, and the village would have been all visible up there. This was going to be their summer home. These mansions were built as summer homes. Most of them lived in Manhattan and wanted to get out of the city in the summertime. And so they started building, but unfortunately, they started right about the turn of the century, in the first years of the 20th century, they come under financial constraints and they stopped construction. At that point, all that was laid down was the cellar and the foundation. Okay, it was supposed to be a 49-room mansion, but all they got done, and the idea was they were going to pick it up again once their economics stabilized. Well, what ended up happening was they both died. They both died within a few years. And the farm was at that point sold to the Coogan family, who now operated it until recently when that's. But you get to see the foundation, and it's fabulous. And the trail works that not only goes by the foundation with signage interpreting the Stillman Foundation, but it allows you, there's stone steps at the back of the foundation which would have gotten the residents into the cellar. You could take that, and the whole thing has been designed, laid with stone, so you could actually walk within the basement, what would have been the basement. So you go by where the wine cellars would have been. You could see how windows from the basement were situated, pillars that held up the structure, how that was organized. It is so cool. I say that because as an archaeologist, I like the ruins. I want to see the cellar. When I go to these houses, I want to see the cellar. Even when I go into 18th century houses here in Connecticut, can I go down in the cellar? I embarrass people. They don't want to go down in the cellar. But that's what you want to look at. And so you're never going to see this. By the way, their daughter, Emma, would marry a guy by the name of Harkness. And they would build their mansion at Harkness State Park in Waterford, not too terribly far away. And that mansion is still standing, and you could tour it with the state of Connecticut. So what you could do is a dual thing. You can go to Harkness Park, see the standing structure, and then go out to Mystic and see her parents' ruins that never quite got built. It's really, really cool. If you're ever up in the Berkshires, I would recommend what's called Becket Quarry. Now, Becket Quarry was called the Hudson Line Quarry or something like that. It began in 1850, before the American Civil War. Now, this thing, okay, the granite there has a kind of a bluish tint, and it's very fine grained. So the granite that was quarried was used in the late 19th century and into the 20th century for statues. It was used for tombs, monuments, because it was so fine grained you could chisel it and carve it to whatever the needs were. So the quarry was used and was active right up before the Civil War and up to just after the Second World War. It closed down in 1947. Now think about that. The owners, I think, must have thought when they stopped the quarrying that they were going to, in fact, start up again at some other point. Because when you go, they just left machinery, they left derricks, they left trucks, they left steam shovels, they left pulleys. It looks like when you go up there, when you get to the quarry, it looks like they just walked off work for the day and just never came back the next morning. Everything is just laying there. In fact, we tell you in the book, when you take the trail and you go through the quarry area that we kind of guide you through, be careful where you're stepping, because there's wires on the ground, there's wires above you, and you want to be, and there's some machinery around. But it's so cool because it just looks like it was just abandoned for the night. It was left for the night. And you got rusted machinery and so forth out there. And the people that do maintain the trail have done a marvelous job with signage up there. You take it, you start from Quarry Road and you go up the hill. It's about a half a mile or so up the hill to get to the quarry. But you find there are human-made mounds of granite stone, cut blocks the size of this table and bigger, that they had quarried out and had left to be shipped away for what purposes. And so you got these mounds, and I mean, when I'm talking 30, 40 feet high of blocks of granite. But it's so cool because it really allows you to, almost see the working going on. And it's well worth it. If you're ever in the Berkshires and you want to do a good hike, I would recommend it. Also in the Berkshires, just thought of it, is the Keystone Bridge Arch Bridge Trail. Keystone Arch Bridge Trail, okay? This has got an 18th century farmstead, ruins, barns, corn cribs, the house, the well are all there. It's got a 19th century arch bridges, the Keystone Arch Bridges that are unbelievable. And it also has a 20th century Berkshire Cultural Center ruin, okay? I'll take you right through that. The stone arch bridges, okay? We talked about the canals, but and how important they were. The Erie Canal, when it was built in the 1820s, connected, the Midwest as that was developing. It was called the Northwest Territory in those days. That we considered that the Northwest, right? Ohio and Indiana and Illinois. And so it brought goods through New York, down the Hudson River to New York City. New York City prospered over the Erie Canal. Goods were going back and forth to the interior, and they were. Well, Boston felt slighted. When Boston, they were being cut off from this economic activity because it was all going down to the Hudson, and you couldn't build a canal over the Berkshires. So the city of Boston got together trying to help their economics. And when the technology of railroads started to come in, they started to come up with an idea, could we build a railroad that would connect the Erie Canal in Albany to Boston? So to go the 150 miles from the Hudson River to the city of Boston and connect that. Well, nobody had ever built a railroad in the 1830s and 1840s over a mountain. And so the engineer they hired was a guy by the name of George Washington Whistler. If Whistler sounds familiar, his son was the painter who did Whistler's mother on a chair, whatever he was doing. But his father, the painter's father, was an engineer. And he figured that the best way through the Berkshires was through the west branch of the Westfield River. But even so, the river meanders, and they had to create 27 overpasses for the train to get down through the Berkshires, and 10 stone arch bridges. The one you see on the trail is a double arch, 70 feet high. The stone is dry laid. We're not talking mortar here. We're talking dry laid, all held together by the keystone at the top of the arch. Extraordinary feat and it's so well put together that they're still sending trains over it today. They still can hold trains with the weight they have today. That alone is worth seeing because that is just absolutely, totally unique. When it opened, when the railroad opened in 1841, It was the longest railroad that had been built to that day. It was the only railroad in the world that ever crossed over a mountain. And it was able to do so because of the arch bridge. And then there's the cultural center that has a great story. Guy by the name of Charles Farmer. He was actually Hungarian, and his wife was Hungarian, Barbara. She was a patron of the arts, and he was very wealthy. He was an engineer, had a mansion in New Jersey. They called it a castle. It was built in the castle motif. As a patron of the arts, she talks to him into him, because she's got the money, and that what they should do is build a cultural center in the Berkshires where artists can come together, writers, painters, sculptors, artists can come and enjoy the beauty of the Berkshires, live together in a colony, and for inspiration. So he puts $160,000 into it, and they start building it. But before long, he gets the idea that this whole cultural center is nothing more than a place that his wife could meet her lover, who was a sculptor. And he becomes enraged, and he really loses it, accusing her, cheating on him, that this is nothing more than a place for them to rendezvous, and while he wasn't around, and he stops payment on the whole thing. The construction all stops. It gets bad between the two. Verbal and physical abuse. They separate. She leaves the house, the castle. But about 2 or 3 weeks later, after they separate, before the divorce proceedings get underway, she comes back to get her wardrobe. She left all her clothes there when she left, and she wanted her clothes. So with her lawyer, she goes back to the castle. They go up to her bedroom, her old bedroom, and unbeknownst to them, Charles, when he designed the castle, had built secret passageways where he can go anywhere in that castle without anybody seeing him. And what he did is he came out, I don't know if it was near the fireplace or what, but he came out of the wall, literally, in her bedroom and accused her again and they start yelling. Finally, he pulls a gun out, 3 shots, shoots her, she drops dead. He then takes the gun and puts it into his heart and shoots. A classic murder-suicide. Trouble is, he doesn't die. She dies instantly. He survives, and he would go to jail, and obviously he would go to court. He was found mentally incapable. He was sentenced to an insane asylum, and he would die about 10 years later. But the artist colony never was finished. And so what today it is ruins. You could see the old pools, you could see where some of the buildings were. And there's a tower that goes up that I'm assuming is where some of the apartments might have been, with a clock tower. That got built, and it just lies there with vines growing over it now. So these are great stories with a great trail system going through. And they're all like this, there are so many, there's 40 trails in the book, and each one has a great history story. You not only learn about what you're seeing in the ruins, but really get a sense of the history behind it all and why those ruins are out there. Some of them are associated with Native American sites, quarries, and Barkhamsted. You've got the Walt Landgraf Trail in People's Forest, and that is a unique one for a Native American site and quarry. You got Revolutionary War camps in Reading, Connecticut, where the Putnam State Park is. It's a loop trail. It's just over a mile, but it takes you right through an old Revolutionary War camp that dates to 1777. and 1778 and 79. Fabulous. There's so much history out there, and some of that history is kind of laid back in the woods. You've got history right down this road, all around you. You've got history in this building. But even out on the trail when you wouldn't expect it, again, that human fingerprint is there. So we ask you, if you go out there, to, be respectful in the sense not to step on stones, don't climb on walls. First of all, they're fragile, you could get hurt, but you don't want to displace anything and ruin what archaeologically is there. And if you see artifacts on the ground, please don't pick them up. If you think you see something unique, we tell you how you can report it. And also we ask you to be stewards. If you go out on those trails and you see something that doesn't appear to be right, how to report it to the state archaeologist or someone, the association that's taking care of the trail, so they have an opportunity to assess it and take care of it. So we ask you to be monitors, but also, respect what's out there, enjoy it, learn the history, and hopefully have a good time out there. And get some exercise while you're doing it. So, obviously we didn't get there.
It isn't a lack of trying.
So we'll leave it with that. But any questions, or do you have any trails that you could think of that might be also served?
In Waterbury, the abandoned religious theme park and the
Yeah, there are. Actually, there's a couple of them in Waterbury because of Market River coming down. The first archaeological site I ever excavated was Fred Warner at Central Connecticut. I had hair back then. It would have been 1973, 1974, something like that. Was a brass mill in Waterbury, which is today part of Harbor Ferry Park or something like that, if you know that area. Yeah, that was my first. But yeah, there are a number of them down there. Recently with the rain you guys had this winter, or this summer, some of the mills and factories along the river, the Housatonic, the Naugatuck, and so forth, some of them wiped out areas where some of the old mills are, exposing things, but also, displacing stones and so forth. I'm not familiar with that particular one, but that whole area just grew up with huge industry. So is that part of a trail?
Well, there's two, Chase Parkway I saw on
Okay.
Facebook. There's like gnome land,
Yes.
and someone walked through those ruins. There's a Connecticut hiker Facebook page that I follow.
Okay, yeah, many.
And then the other is the abandoned religious theme
You
park.
guys, you remember Borden's Milk?
Yes.
All right, Borden's Milk, their first factory was in Torrington,
Burr
and
Pond.
it's part of Burr Park, and the ruins are still there. We had an archaeological survey done many, many years ago, but the problem with that ruin, and why I didn't put it in the book, because Borden is such a great story. They didn't find Elsie, by the way. But Borden was such a great story. But the problem is the mill ruins are nowhere near the trails. They're down a steeper slope.
Right, they're off the road.
They're hard to
There
get
was
to.
a sign 25 years
Yeah.
ago that someone tore it down.
It's a great, great site.
Well, first of all, the way you presented everything, it was wonderful, so I got pictures in my mind, okay? So it was fantastic.
I appreciate it.
Sometimes we go, this is not a great piece of archaeology, but the economics puzzle me. There's a trail going by the Hubbard River in Colebrook. It's right at the very, almost start of the reservoir. It goes down, and so over about a mile and a half, you go up, and it's about 400 feet, and you're following this Hubbard River, which, by the way, is dramatic.
It goes into the compensating reservoir.
Right, particularly after a rainstorm. It's, but about a mile in this road that's still maintained by the MDC, there's a stone, I think it was a farm or a sawmill or something, and I'm saying,
It's on water or just
Yeah.
The
on
Hubbard
water?
River crosses underneath the road, and there is the remnants of what looks like a mill. And it's actually on the Massachusetts-Connecticut line. As you
Okay.
walk up that trail, it's
This
a
is
road.
not where you and I and Walt went years ago, Walt Landgraf? No, okay.
no, this,
No, this is very accessible right
Neat.
from the,
Right from the road?
yeah,
Right from the
after,
highway.
after heavy rain, go there, it's really cool. I mean, there's
Yeah,
Cascading waters and stuff.
you're over the dam.
No, over
No, over this rocks.
over these rocks,
Over the
the
rocks.
stream. It's like a small Farmington River.
Neat.
But what's the economics? I mean, they're a mile down road, you have to descend 300 feet, then you have to descend 400 feet to get to Granby. And where are you? What were they
Who
doing
lives
there?
You know, this is why they moved out west when the Ohio Valley opened up.
It's just a mystery, like, who would do this?
I know.
Okay.
It's, you know, good old Yankees, they used every bit of the land and they were rugged.
Yeah.
Maybe why they didn't live long, I don't know.
Yeah.
But, I mean, they used it. I mean, I've seen stone walls go up slopes that, you could hardly walk up and there's a stone wall coming all the way
Anyway,
down.
and Hubbard River, it's like 20 minutes away from us, but it's.
You know, the earliest mills, many of the earliest mills were actually built right on the rivers. They straddled the rivers. And that turned out to be kind of complex because of the fact that a good storm can wipe your whole operation out. So that's when they started to set the mills to the side of the stream and build, the head race and the tail race
I got it.
so they could divert everything to keep it away from the pounding water and bring it in when they need it and then discharge it. But that sounds really interesting, and it's, right. It's just like that cheese box factory. What it's doing up there is like, obviously, you could get there from a different way that we took without having to go up the steep hill,
Sure.
obviously. But, yeah, no, they, and you see some of the stones that these people utilized, for the dams and the mills. I mean, these are, the size of cars.
How did they move?
And of course, it was all done without hydraulics. It was all done with leverage and moving. And, they had, their cattle to help them move some of the stuff in terms of dragging it and so forth. But it was all the fulcrum and leverage, and they got a lot done. It's amazing. It's amazing. When the Ohio Valley opened up, it's flat and less stony, and a lot of Connecticut farmers moved out west because it was much easier than the rugged hills and the landscape they had here. In fact, there's a story of one farmer who went out west, came back to Connecticut 10 years later, and he meets his old neighbors at the Grange. And of course, they're all asking him, how's Ohio? What's Ohio? He's telling them. And in the course of the evening, he reaches into his pocket and he pulls out a stone about the size of his fist. And he says to his old neighbors, "This is the biggest stone in my field." And they all crunched. But yeah, we'd have to take a look at it. But I'm going to make a note of that because that sounds really intriguing.
Good.
Yeah. Here, let me come back here so I can hear you.
Hi, Nick. Really enjoyed your talk as always. My special interest area in history is the old mills, and you really intrigued me with the cheese box
Yeah.
factory story. My question to you, and maybe also to Mark,
Mark.
is what was left of the machinery that told you what the product was of the mills? And my reason for asking that is in Avon, we had the Woodford's mill, which was a grist mill, a sawmill, and the last mill that it was a box shop.
Yeah.
And my research colleague Doug Ross and I found, like in the deeds, inventory of, the millstones and this and that and the other thing that were sold off. So, like I said, what told you that that was their product?
So the metal, I mean, one of the issues with the old mills is they all had metal and metal all associated with it. So if whatever wasn't used at the time when the mill closed down, but when you had the scrap iron drive, so the First World War and the Second World War, they were looking for metal, and they went through all the old mills. They went to a lot of the abandoned houses, and they just searching for it. But old mills were literally stripped of metal primarily through scrap iron drives. It's really rare to find much. You know, I guess that's what makes, well, of course, the quarry I mentioned up in Beckett, Massachusetts, you know, it closed down after the war, so there's still metal all over the place. It's just incredible. But yeah, that we rarely find unless it's pretty hidden away. Or sometimes we've had cases where turbines were actually still in the ground,
Yeah,
and that's pretty rare.
That's
But
pretty cool.
most of the metal got all taken off.
yeah, yeah. So like I said, so how did you know that that shop produced cheese boxes?
Yeah.
What told you that?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, those, you know, would have disintegrated over time, so how
Yeah,
did you
yeah.
know that was the product of that mill? Is there
Well,
any-
we really don't know if
Okay.
it exactly is a cheese box. I think that's what Paul was saying.
I think there's something on it in the Park Hampstead Heritage, the history
Oh,
of
okay.
Park Hampstead. So
All right.
somebody had noted it.
Yeah, had mentioned that that's what it was used for, because everybody else was saying the same thing. So
Uh-huh.
we call it the cheese box.
Okay.
It would be great to have an archaeological survey
Yeah,
or,
cool
you
beans.
know,
No.
work done there to figure out
Okay.
if that is exactly.
Another
what
road
we
trip,
can
big
find.
guy, we gotta go check this out.
Oh, yeah, we can find you an easier way to get in, but.
Thank
There's a
you.
climb. Good to see you.
You too.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.